So I'd like to thank you for coming this evening. I'm Grant Wilson, as you may have guessed by now, and I'll be doing the presentation today. This is one of the first in a whole series of lectures that we're running over spring on sleep and sleep disorders by members of the Faculty of Health Clinics, from physiotherapy and from pharmacy staff as well. So I'm a physiotherapist who sort of specialises in sleep disorders, and that grew up out of my work back at Royal Prince Alfred Hospital in Sydney, where is one of the sort of foremost sleep centres in Australia, where sleep medicine really grew up in Australia. And physiotherapists have a large role in treating sleep disorders. They're mainly breathing disorders that occur during sleep. But as you get more into sleep and sleep disorders, you get more interested in other areas as well. And this area of poor sleep and insomnia is one that we deal with every day in our clinical practice. And it's something that's people want addressed, obviously, and that's usually why people come to a lecture like this, that they might find some information that might help them personally. I gained a big interest in the area through my own experience of poor sleep and insomnia, and that's often how people get into these things. They experience it themselves and they want to know what lies behind it and how to treat it. So that's how I got into it. And this is just a picture of my daughter some years ago sleeping blissfully, and I'd sort of start with this because this is often what people who sleep poorly really long for, a nice blissful sleep. And often they're thinking back to a time in their life where they slept well and things weren't like this before, and they compare the way they're sleeping now and think, no, I'm not sleeping like I used to sleep before, and you sort of lose that sort of feel, that sense of sort of control, that things were easy, you didn't have to think about them before, and now why has everything gone sort of awry with my sleep? Often we find in clinical practice also that people who have insomnia often sleep with partners who sleep quite well, and that can be quite frustrating for somebody who is a poor sleeper and who has insomnia, that this other person, how do they sleep so well when I'm lying here half the night? And so hopefully we'll, with the lecture today, push you a little bit further towards a better sleep. And why I entitled the talk Getting a Better Night's Sleep is perhaps we're not looking for a cure out of this talk, we're looking about things improving. So firstly, I'd just like to mention the affiliations that I have as a lecturer here at the university. I'm an academic here at the university, and I also teach at the Sydney Uni and their sleep courses as well. And there are a number of private institutions who I'm associated with as well. Our clinic here at the university is quite unique in that we have a mixture of student clinics where students are undergoing training. We have academics who are working in clinical practice who keep maintaining their clinical recency by seeing patients. And we also have a group of private practitioners, people who are literally running their own business within the folds of the Faculty of Health Clinics, which is sort of the overarching title for the clinics that are running within there. And so my private company is called Sleep and Lifestyle Solutions, and we work with another company called Sleep Services Australia, who are sleep physicians who do sleep studies. And just to mention about the clinic, we have a variety of different services that are running there within the clinic, including our sleep clinic, but there are physiotherapy services, both registered physios and students. Psychology, we have a large psychology clinic, which is both students doing masters in psychology, registered psychologists, and also Headspace, the youth mental health service, is co-located within the clinics as well. Nutrition and dietetics, again, students and registered practitioners. Massage therapists, exercise physiologists, and pharmacy and midwifery are also going to be joining the clinic in soon to be joining. So the talk tonight, we're going to cover quite a broad range of different topics, looking at why we actually sleep, the different sleep stages and why they're important, why we actually sleep and how much sleep that we might need. Something about the scientific basis for sleep, what actually controls sleep, and how an understanding of that may help you in getting control over your sleep. And so that's often quite important, feeling like you have a control over the situation, that you can improve it. Look a little bit about the consequences of poor sleep, and some of you may know these from personal experience. What we do about promoting healthy sleep, and a little bit about sleep disorders in general. So it's going to be quite a broad overview. So with any of these lectures we give to the general public or to people who are interested in a therapeutic response from what we say, we do always put up this disclaimer about what we're saying. We're not actually knowing you as individuals, so we can't really say that anything I say tonight will be specifically targeted to you. So we're giving you general information which may help you in the management of some condition that you may have, but nothing we say should be construed as advice to you personally, and we recommend that if you have issues, medical issues, that you seek consultation with a registered practitioner, a medical practitioner or other healthcare professional, and we'll direct you to some regard in that tonight. Another important thing to say is that sleep disorders can lead to sleepiness or drowsiness, and we know that this can be dangerous. Undertaking dangerous activity or driving while sleepy can endanger both yourself and the public. Now, some of the things we say tonight, sometimes you get worse before you get better with some of these techniques that we'll talk about. So you must take that into consideration as we discuss the various approaches. So what is sleep? Well, we can define sleep behaviourally in terms of when we see someone asleep. So sleep, the person who's asleep, they're perceptually disengaged from the environment. They don't really know what's going on, and they're almost unconscious to what's actually going on around them. And so we could look at them and define it behaviourally. But in the sleep lab and in sleep medicine circles, we generally define sleep in terms of physiological signals. We measure various parts of your physiology. And the way we score sleep in the sleep lab, the different stages of sleep, is to measure three parameters. The EEG, the electroencephalogram, the brain activity at various places on the scalp. The electrooculogram, so the movements of the eyes. The eyeball has a potential difference between the front and the back. So as it moves within the skull, we can measure changes in electrical activity. And the EMG, and so we usually measure the muscles of the chin or muscles of the jaw to give us some sort of a global measurement of what is the muscle activity of the person. Now, people when they sleep usually take a recumbent posture because there's a reduction in EMG activity, the muscles relax, and so we take a recumbent posture so we don't collapse. And you'll have all had those embarrassing situations when you're falling asleep in a lecture and your head does that very ungraceful sort of bobbing around, or you start dribbling if you're that unlucky during a lecture. Hopefully none of that will happen this evening during this one. So sleep is then defined in certain stages according to basically in non-rapid eye movement sleep, where we spend about 75% of our night, according to the EEG and the changes in the EEG. So here's the EEG in wakefulness. It's a very rapid activity is present there. It's called an alpha rhythm of the EEG. When we get sleepy and get drowsy, we see this sort of slowing, the loss of the alpha rhythm. We get this sort of mixed frequency and amplitude EEG present. Stage 2 is a light sleep, still a light sleep, where we have these distinct EEG phenomena, things called K complexes and these sleep spindles, these rapid spindling type brain waves, which have their origin in certain parts of the brain. Then we move into slow wave sleep, generally called deep sleep, where we have this high amplitude, slow EEG activity. And these are often called delta waves. Another important stage is rapid eye movement sleep. This occurs in about 4 to 5 distinct periods across the night, and for this stage to be scored we need all the parameters, all the physiological parameters. In rapid eye movement sleep, the brain is very active. It looks like the person's actually awake at that time, and looking at the EEG activity, you can't really tell if the person's asleep or awake. But if you look at the other parameters, you can tell they're in a stage of sleep. The EMG activity is totally silent, where all the postural muscles become totally atonic during REM sleep. And we become like a quadriplegic at that time. Everything stops working, and our diaphragm is the only thing sustaining breathing at that stage. The eyes move as if in a phasic fashion, as if we're looking at things that are going on around us during REM sleep. And here we can see these phasic eye movements in this patient under having REM sleep at this stage. So as I've sort of mentioned, there are certain amounts of this type of sleep. Slow wave sleep, about 25% of the night. The rest of the time is spent in REM and stage 2. So here we can see this as what's called an ultradian rhythm as we cycle between the various stages. So the person falls asleep, and the yellow is stage 1, into stage 2, this lighter sleep, and then they have a block of slow wave sleep. Then up into REM, and so they finish their first phase of sleep. And then they cycle back through the stages again. You can see that in this normal subject, there's quite a distinct pattern across the night. And most of the slow wave sleep occurs within the first third to 1/2 of their sleep. And this may be some sort of protective mechanism of the organism, as we can have what's almost a power sleep of 3 hours and get most of the sleep that we need, most of this deep sleep and REM sleep. And this is important to note if you're undergoing a period of poor sleep, that the body will try and protect itself by getting you into the deeper stages of sleep. And so, although a full night's sleep is likely to be more restorative for the person, you can actually survive and continue to function on quite short amounts of sleep, because the organism tends to protect itself. The person tends to protect itself against sleep loss. So sleep stages do change across the life cycle, and people do, as they get older, complaints of poor sleep and insomnia become more prevalent. And this may be related in part to the changes in sleep itself, and the physiology of sleep. And here we can see the change from age 5 through to age 85 in the distribution of sleep stages in the population. And you can see that the total amount of sleep here, time in minutes, does reduce as we get older. And this time we spend awake after our onset of sleep, so here we're saying we fall asleep and we have a period of sleep, and then we're awake for some period of time after that during our sleep. This wake after sleep onset does increase as we get older. There are a number of factors contributing to this, and it might be related to, for example, pain or medical issues or whatever, that do disturb sleep and make sleep worse in an older subject. You can see that slow wave sleep, that deep delta sleep, does reduce over the lifespan as well. And slow wave sleep is one of the stages where it's hard to wake someone up from as well. So this can be another factor leading to a failure to consolidate sleep. The other stages you can see stay relatively the same throughout the lifespan, although there's a slight drop off in the rapid eye movement sleep, which in neonates and babies this takes up a large portion of the sleep time. So why do we sleep? Well, one important reason is if you don't sleep, you die, basically. And we know that from animal experiments that have been done on rats, for example, which have been sort of sacrificed to the causes of science in working out these things, that if a rat is deprived of sleep for about 11 to 22 days, it will die. It's totally deprived of sleep. Each phase of sleep is important. The slow wave sleep, the non-rapid eye movements of the deeper sleep, and also the REM sleep as well. And the rat will eventually die if selectively deprived of the certain types of sleep as well, although it takes much longer for that to occur than if total sleep is deprived. So sleep is important, obviously, for the survival of these rats, and presumably for humans as well. I think it's been estimated that humans might be able to survive, I think it's 80 days of total sleep deprivation before they would die. I'm not sure how they come up with that sort of figure. Now, the characteristics of these sleep-deprived rats is they get dishevelled and clumped fur. They start to develop lesions on their skin and on their tails and paws, and they start to lose weight. And this is and their metabolic rate doubles, and their food intake increases markedly as well. So they get this weight loss and eventually die. So sleep loss is not good for you, and that's one of the points that we're making in this presentation. Is we're not underestimating anyone's lack of sleep and the effect that it may be having on them as an individual. So how much sleep do we need, and what are these other reasons why we might sleep? Well, sleep loss has an impact on a number of different areas, as you may have known from personal experience. If you deprive people of sleep, they become more sleepy. They become more likely to fall asleep. And we know this from studies where people are deprived of sleep and then given opportunities to sleep across the day, and their latency to sleep will decrease as sleep is deprived more and more. They'll fall asleep quicker and quicker. Mood alters as well, and cognitive function can be impaired. Vigilance is impaired. The ability to concentrate can be impaired, and memory function as well. Immune function, it's now believed that yes, it does have an effect on immune function, although the studies don't concur all the time. For example, the ability to seroconvert after you've been given a vaccination. If the person's deprived of sleep after they're given the vaccination, the likelihood that they'll seroconvert is reduced. So sleep has an effect on those sorts of processes. Now, one thing people are asking all the time of us in the sleep clinic is, how much sleep do I actually need? How much is enough for me? And this can be a question because people want to target that amount of sleep to maximise their well-being. And traditionally it's been thought that, well, you need about 8 hours, and you'll often see that if you go searching around the web and things, that will pop up quite frequently. But when we look at population studies that have looked at mortality, so the amount of people dying in a given population, the optimal amount of sleep, as reported by the participants in these studies, the optimal amount of sleep is not 8 hours. In fact, the optimum survival is actually 6.5 to 7.5 hours per night. And this study here looks at the mortality of a group of people versus this optimum survival in this group that lived, that only was sleeping 6.5 to 7.5 hours. You can see that those people who are having what we would consider to be the optimal amount of sleep, 8 hours, do actually die more frequently, 10% more likely to die. So there is problems with this data because it's self-reported from a population, but it is suggestive that there is this sort of U-shaped curve where there's an optimal amount of sleep. As people sleep less, or versus people who sleep more, don't seem to do as well. Now, we can't really apply that to any individual. We can't say, oh, well, you should be getting 6.5 to 7.5. It all depends on more importantly on these factors. How do I function on a day-to-day basis? Am I getting enough sleep? Well, do I feel sleepy? Is there alterations in my cognition, in my memory, etc.? Is there alterations in immune function? But this is interesting data to just have in the back of our mind when we're trying to have unrealistic expectations about the amount of sleep that we may need for good health or for a long life, for example. So what actually regulates sleep? Well, we know that sleep, like wakefulness, is an active process within the brain. There's parts of the brain that actually drive sleep, from the reticular formation and from the hypothalamus. And many of these studies were done by looking at the brains of people who couldn't sleep, became totally insomniacs, and then looking at their brain and working out which areas have been destroyed, and the hypothalamus was recognised as one area that was very important. And the hypothalamus is important in developing these rhythms, the biological rhythms that drive sleep, these circadian rhythms. And so if we're looking, for example, at a rhythm in temperature, it might sort of look like this across the waking versus sleeping time of a subject who's enjoying a really good sleep, where they're having consolidated sleep here from 11 through to 7 in this example. Now there's another process going on. There's what's called a homeostatic process. And these are in this model, in this two-process model, are the two really important factors driving sleep onset and driving the tendency to consolidate or get what we would call a good sleep, uninterrupted sleep. So this homeostatic factor is this factor S, and that's really sleep deprivation, how long you've been awake for. And in general, as a person stays up longer and longer and longer, their drive to sleep gets more and more and more, so as they restrict their sleep. So under the optimal circumstance, a person will stay awake all day and build up this homeostatic drive to sleep, and that will coincide with a loss of alertness as their circadian cycle winds down, their temperature winds down here, and so at about the time that you want to fall asleep, these two things coincide with each other to, as some have said, sort of you catch this sort of wave of sleep to go into sleep as these two factors converge. Then across the night there's a change in the circadian cycle, the alerting factors start to build towards morning, and sleep deprivation is worn off as you wear off that homeostatic drive to sleep. And then the same thing will happen the next day. What we do with a lot of our treatment techniques is we try and augment both these processes and also get them aligned with each other. That's an important thing we're trying to do. So the circadian cycle, as I've said, might be a circadian cycle for core body temperature. As we can see, temperature drops here during, as we approach bedtime, and then drops further as we're asleep, and then builds towards morning. So this is an important factor to consider. What temperature are you at? Other things are happening. So the hypothalamus drives secretion of melatonin from the pineal gland, and this secretion of melatonin into the bloodstream, which opens sort of a gate for sleep, allows you more easily to fall asleep. And so you have this secretion of melatonin, which usually sort of happens about an hour before sleep onset. And there's also changes in cortisol and stress levels as well. So an important thing to realise about the circadian cycle is that it's not always 24 hours. It doesn't work on this sort of 24-hour cycle of our clocks. That when you put a person in a constant routine environment without actually cues of night and day, that the cycle will, in general, it will lengthen out. And so the person will have a longer day than 24 hours. So generally they'll start to go to bed a bit later and later and later each night when there's no cues from light. So an important factor in maintaining circadian cycle is light and darkness, and having those cues. It's the light entering the eyes which affects the hypothalamus and affects this secretion of melatonin. So getting adequate light is an important part of therapy as well, exposing yourself to light and having a very constant routine where that light and dark exposure is very predictable, and stopping this sort of thing from occurring. In some people, their cycle is lower than 24 hours, but the tendency will, it won't fit into usually our 24-hour clock. So do you have a sleep problem? And I think many people, of course, they're attending this lecture would say, yes, I do. But these are some sort of questions that I just sort of put up here to sort of, I would answer yes, you do have a sleep problem if you answer yes to any of these questions. I could talk about the formal definition of insomnia, but rather than that I sort of say, do you have problems initiating or maintaining your sleep? Are you waking up in the middle of the night or waking up earlier than what you would like? Does it take you longer than half an hour to fall asleep on 3 nights a week, for example, might be a more formal definition. Do you have lots of what you'd call bad nights of sleep? Is your sleep unrefreshing, or are you sleeping long enough? The most common sleep disorder out in the community is what we call insufficient sleep syndrome, which is that people don't sleep long enough. They naturally deprive themselves of sleep because they've got too many things going on in their lives. So what are the consequences of poor sleep? Well, this sort of list arises from really those effects of sleep deprivation. Sleepiness and fatigue, a feeling that you're fatigued, poor concentration and perhaps memory function, irritability and mood changes. Important to this is mental health issues of depression and anxiety, or becoming depressed as you have poor sleep. Equally, depression and poor sleep are linked almost intrinsically, and what is causing what can be quite difficult to dissect at times. Or is there just some impairment in your everyday function? This slide here is when I was in Japan. I went to visit the temple. It's actually at that Zen rock garden. They had this little display there, and this is what the monks used as they were praying out to the garden. Obviously, a lot of the monks started to fall asleep because of their heavy schedule, and they have these big whacker things that they would whack them on the bottom of their soles of their feet to wake them up as they were falling asleep. So that was a consequence of sleep deprivation, but not one we'd like to mete out. So how do I fix my sleep, and what are the steps to moving forward? Well, we know that cognitive behavioural therapy techniques can be quite useful, and so we thought in these lectures we'd present some, not so much the science of it, but it's underpinned by a huge amount of science, a huge amount of high quality trials, randomised controlled trials that have looked at these various measures to improve people's sleep. So underpinning our recommendations are hard science that these things actually do cause results. And the studies do show that these techniques work for treating poor sleep and insomnia. They have a success rate sort of around about 60 to 80% in the trials. And unfortunately, many of the people who don't succeed in the treatment, they drop out. There's an attrition of people from the studies. They don't follow the recommendations because they're too hard or it doesn't suit their lifestyle. And so this is, a substantial reason why many of these trials aren't successful in some people. But despite that, those that persist do get improvements. Now, every time we try to initiate a program like this with people, often the patient will say to me, or the client will say to me, look, I've tried everything. You're telling me something that I've heard before. But then once I try to explain to them the comprehensiveness of what I want them to do, and I explain to them that I want them to keep going with it for a month, for 2 months, for 3 months, I want you to keep on this program, then they say, well, no, actually I haven't tried that before. Actually, I only tried part of what you're saying for a shorter period of time. And these recommendations are likely to be onerous. You know, I rarely see somebody who said, oh, that was really easy to do what you told me to do. You know, no worries. Yeah. Usually the techniques are onerous, and they will often lead to some, you know, decrement in the person's function initially before they start to improve. But many people start to get improvement within about the first 2 weeks, and then things can improve even after that. Something also I'll say is about investigation and treatment of a sleep disorder, because I'm going to talk about a type of poor sleep. It's a sort of psychophysiological type thing. It involves behaviour and physiology and cognition as well. But if you've got an underlying sleep disorder that's stopping you from sleeping effectively, then that needs to be investigated and potentially treated. So screening for sleep disorders could be important in your case. So I'll use this sort of model to explain my recommendations in terms of behaviours and thinking and things. It's what's called a 3P model. It's Spielman is basically the instigator of this model. And what it says is that somebody who develops poor sleep or insomnia, in this case it's represented by this sort of dotted line here on the graph. As this bar gets more than this dotted line, then the person develops insomnia, or they develop poor sleep. If we can keep these factors below this dotted line, then they won't experience that. Now there's usually 3 factors that can be traced to some degree in individuals. There's predisposing factors, precipitating factors, and then there's perpetuating factors, things that keep these issues going. And these are just some examples of what they might be, just so you've got in your mind some sort of examples. Now, this is sort of one end of the spectrum here in terms of predisposing factors. So familial light sleep, or people who just have families are naturally disrupted sleepers. They're not people who sleep well. People who are over-concerned with their well-being. Now, everyone's got some degree of this. You know, we've got some concern about our well-being, concern about our sleep. But some people perhaps potentially are over-concerned about these sorts of factors. Introspective and worrying disposition, or an anxious disposition, also can be one of these factors. Now, the sort of factors that precipitate insomnia can often be something that someone can put their finger on. It happened at a certain time for them. And so in my case, it was losing employment or stress in employment. Nothing like that happens at the University of Canberra, I'm sure, as a former employee. Other factors might be pain, for example, musculoskeletal pain, or pain related to some medical condition. Just acute stressful event, or a relationship breakdown, or somebody passes away, for example. These factors lead to acute insomnia, and you can trace it back to that event. But then what happens is that these factors often dissipate over time, and then there's these factors that perpetuate the problem. And that can be an excessive focus on sleep, increased time in bed while awake, or taking daytime naps. So here we can see the development of potentially poor sleep and insomnia. Here's our clinical threshold running through here. Pre-morbidly, the person's got these predisposing factors. They have this precipitating event which causes acute insomnia. Then the insomnia continues over time, and the perpetuating factors start to increase. And eventually over time the perpetuating factors increase to such an extent that they are maintaining the condition above the threshold. And in fact this is what clients commonly say, that I can trace this back to a certain time, but now that's totally gone away now. You know, I've got a new job, I'm happy in my new job, but why can't I sleep? And that's because the perpetuating factors have taken over. And a lot of our recommendations do address these factors. And so once a person learns how to control these factors or address them, then if they get insomnia in the future, they then immediately know how to start to control it. So Spielman has actually done research in his large group of clients looking at what are the common characteristics of these factors in the clients. And as you read through this list, some of them may ring true for you, and they may suggest areas that need to be addressed. So things like excessive time in bed. The person tries to make up for poor sleep or sleep that can't be guaranteed. They don't know when they're going to get to sleep, so they spend more time in bed to try and make up for poor sleep or for short sleep durations. Irregular timing of retiring and arising. So not having a nice steady cycle like I showed you that we're designed for. Unpredictability of sleep, so we don't know when we're going to sleep, so often that goes with excessive time in bed. I don't know when I'm going to go to sleep, so I'm going to spend a long time in bed to make sure that I can get that sleep I need. Worrying over daytime deficits, things like if I don't get a good sleep tonight, it's going to affect me to tomorrow, and then this worry sort of just builds and builds and builds in terms of being able to perform. Multiple bouts of sleep, so these might be naps or fragmented sleep across a night. Maladaptive conditioning, so associating certain factors with sleep for a person, like watching the television, for example. Well, when I wake up and watch the television in the middle of the night and I'm lying in bed, then I can fall asleep. And these things in many people don't lead to a consistent sleep cycle. Increased caffeine consumption, so in an attempt to maintain alertness and vigilance, the person will increase their caffeine consumption. And use of sleep medications and alcohol to promote sleep as well. So these are some of the things that I'd suggest may be useful. Now you'll see that what we're giving you tonight is some things to really start you thinking, and I'll show you some other avenues you might go down. But these are some of the overview of some of the things you might be thinking about, or some of the flavour of how we get people to sleep better. And one thing is we tell them not to worry if they don't sleep. And for many people this can be the major key. And over the years as I've been treating people with sleep problems, it's funny, they come back to me and say, what you told me about something or other was the thing that really worked for me. You gave me this advice, and once I started not to worry about my sleep, once I talked to you about it and you'd explained to me about it, I didn't worry about it anymore, and next thing you know, I was able to sleep. I was able to sleep better. So often a way of overcoming it is to almost laugh in the face of a lack of sleep and just sort of lie there and go, I don't care if I sleep, because worrying about it is not going to particularly help me. And we know that sleep is an automatic process, so worrying about it, thinking about sleep, is not something that is going to enhance the process. And in fact, this wave will come over you. In terms of thinking about sleep, the thing that you should think about is following this advice and the behaviours, and making sure that you're in a position that when this wave will arise in your case. So efforts to initiate sleep in many ways can be counterproductive. Also remembering that you're not alone is very important as well, especially if you're sleeping next to someone who's sleeping particularly well. Complaints about sleep are very common in our community, and about 10% of the population on any one night is experiencing difficulty getting off to sleep. And sort of one of the things about, you know, not worrying about sleep, one technique that people use for dealing with a racing mind, or with this racing mind that may be thinking about sleep and the consequences of sleep, one thing that some people recommend doing is just trying to lie there and stay awake. Try and just lie there and think about, well, I'm going to try and stay awake here, just lying here quietly, nice and relaxed and staying awake. And in some people that can be the sort of thing that helps them. But some people do find that they find it very hard to switch off when they have a racing mind. And so these are some techniques. Now, techniques need to be individualised to each person, and what will work for one person won't work for another. And this is where some help from a psychologist or doing an insomnia program can really help people, because you get exposed to a number of different techniques, some of which may actually work for you. Some people find some of these techniques where you tighten and relax your muscles to be more annoying than actually something that causes them to be able to switch off. So being open to a variety of different things. But allowing time to unwind is very important too, and not exposing yourself to too much light in that period as well. So watching television, for example, is particularly bad because the blue light emitted from a television screen alters the circadian cycle, and often the content of television doesn't allow the mind to unwind as well. Putting the day to rest can be important, and this may involve just sitting down before sleep and writing down thoughts or concerns or worries or plans, etc., and then putting them aside so that you're not thinking about them as you go to sleep. You know, learning relaxation and various imagery techniques can be very useful. One that I've used is making up a whole story and then going through that story each night to help you relax. A pleasant, very complicated story that you follow through. Important things also in terms of your thinking, but also in terms of what you actually do, your behaviours. So here we're involved in training this circadian cycle, and key to this is maintaining the same waking time each morning, and if possible exposing yourself to light in those early hours as well. So the optimal circumstance would be you wake at the same time each morning, and this will be determined based on what you have to do on various days, but you're going to have to wake earlier rather than later with this sort of methodology. Waking and then exposing yourself to light in that first hour, hour and a half after you wake. There are various light emitting devices that can be used for these, but perhaps exercising at that time would be useful as well. So getting up, going for a walk in the sunshine will help cue the circadian cycle to when your waking time is, and that will strengthen your circadian cycle at night. Make it more likely that you'll be able to initiate sleep and stay asleep on the subsequent nights. Now, do not sleep longer to make up for perceived short sleeps. That's important. If you've had a short sleep, we recommend that you still wake up at that same time. Sleeping in, for example, on weekends is discouraged by sleep professionals. Maximum time for sleeping in would be around about the 15 to 30 minute mark. 30 minutes is a very long sleep in for a sleep professional. So we recommend that you avoid sleeping in, and if it's a greater problem with poor sleep, usually we take away these sleep-ins. It's one of the first things to go because it alters the circadian cycle. As I've suggested, exercise helps. Exercising in the morning, exposing yourself to light coming into the eyes, we recommend not exercising close to sleep, within 3 hours of sleep, because that lifts the core temperature, and as you saw the temperature dropping towards bedtime, it makes it more difficult to initiate sleep. So avoiding exercise at that time. Part of our being quite blasé about sleep and not worrying about sleep is this total lack of need to look at a clock anymore, because we don't care about our sleep, right? We don't care if it's been 1 hour I've been asleep or 3 hours, because I'm just following this program of entraining my sleep to certain hours. So if you need a clock to get up, and most people will on this type of cycle, you have an alarm clock set, and you turn that alarm clock around so you can't see the time throughout the night. You go to bed, and then this time passes that you don't know what time it actually is. And if you wake up in the night, you're not really concerned about how long you've been asleep or how long it is till morning. You just follow the program. So we don't banish the clocks as such. We just don't have anything to do with clocks across the night. Turn the clocks around, but use the alarm, because that will tell you when that threshold, when that time is to actually get up and get active. We use this what's called stimulus control therapy to limit our bed activities. We develop an association with what we do in bed, and if we lie there awake, perhaps worrying or whatever, thinking certain thoughts, planning or whatever, then this self-perpetuates and we start to develop this behaviour. So we alter that by limiting bed activities to sleep and to sex. So we don't remain in bed if we've been awake for about 15 minutes, so what we call a quarter-hour rule. So if you've been lying in bed for what you perceive to be 15 minutes, and you don't know how long it is because you haven't got a clock, so you've just been lying there and you think it might be 15 minutes, or if you're lying there knowing for sure, I'm not going to be able to go to sleep in this state at the moment, then generally you'll actually get up at that stage. And you'll get up and go usually to another room within the house that's set up for you to come and sit there. It's good if you could have a lamp in that place, and you could sit there and perhaps read, do something that's not too stimulating, not watching television or getting that light into the eyes, but perhaps reading a magazine or doing something. Not doing university work that's overly stimulating and arousing, something that you find relaxing. Then when you feel relaxed, ready for sleep again, then you can go back to bed. And the same process may ensue again. But we then get up at the same time in the morning, at this set time. So sleep is naturally restricted using this methodology. We also use a method called sleep restriction, usually at the same time, simultaneously with this. And that involves measuring someone's sleep, how long they're actually sleeping for over a period of time, over a period of 2 weeks. And we'll do that using a sort of device like this. It's a sleep diary, and I put these sleep diaries out the front if you care to take one. And in here we document the sleep you're getting over a period of maybe 2 weeks. And based on the sleep that a person's actually getting, we'll start to restrict the time that they spend in bed to potentially their hours that they're actually going to sleep. So if I keep a diary of my sleep and I'm sleeping for 5.5 hours across a period of 2 weeks, when I'm in a state of poor sleeping, I will then restrict the period that I could be in bed to, say, 6 hours, for example. Often the time of about 7 hours is used as a good starting point. And if the person's poor sleep doesn't resolve, then we just keep restricting the time in bed more and more to try and consolidate their sleep. So we use these methodologies to try and improve the person's ability to be able to predict when they'll be able to sleep. Once the person starts to sleep better, then we start to increase the duration of the sleep periods, but usually only by no more than 15 minutes. And often that will be at the start of the night when they're going off to sleep. Important is not napping during the day. It can confuse the circadian clock as to when you're supposed to be sleeping. There is some argument about how you treat insomnia, and you'll see some other methodologies that are quite different to this type of methodology, where people learn actually how to sleep. They have multiple episodes of trying to sleep. And so there is some argument about this as a recommendation. And I think if you are going to have a sleep, it should be as early as you possibly can. So you want to have your sleep before 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and it just should be a power nap for no more than 20 minutes. If you have a power nap for no more than 20 minutes, you won't go into the deep cycles of sleep, and so you'll cause less confusion to the circadian clock. So any napping, if you're absolutely dog-tired and you think, I've just got to have a sleep, then having a short 20-minute power nap is most probably allowable using these techniques. So, as I've said to you before, go to bed when you feel sleepy. Don't go to bed just because it's time to sleep. So here we set the threshold for sleep. And that's usually done in terms of what's usually the latest sort of time that a person may be going to sleep. Well, I generally go to bed between 9:30 or 9 o'clock and 11 p.m. So we set a threshold which is the later of those times, and you only go to bed if come 11 p.m. you feel relaxed and ready to go to bed, relaxed, ready to sleep. We don't go to bed just because it's 10 o'clock, right? You only go to bed when you feel relaxed and ready for it. Ensure you're feeling comfortable and relaxed. Different people describe it in different ways, but comfortable and ready for sleep at that time. Have a bedtime ritual. So these are sorts of do's and don'ts. Eating large amounts of food near bedtime, drinking alcohol, caffeine, all these things that stimulate. Caffeine should be minimised in someone following this type of program. Perhaps one caffeinated beverage before midday would be a recommendation. Watching stimulating TV or computer-based activities, again, which may stimulate mentally, but also this blue light is emitted from the screen. Light snacks could potentially be helpful. Warm milk, warm bath is sometimes recommended, or having a water bottle, hot water bottle to just warm your feet can be helpful as well. Listening to relaxing music or doing something that relaxes you, such as reading, might be helpful as well. So we've put together there quite a number of different strategies, behaviours, way of thinking. But I think you could go a lot further than what we've talked about today. And there are a number of ways that you could potentially do that. One thing that I've put together is this guide to better sleeping, which is really a sort of brings out a few more of the things that we've talked about tonight. It's a sort of 4-page, sort of written in more lay terms about sleep and how to get a good night's sleep. But it's a comprehensive program where you work on all the aspects simultaneously as a program to try and improve your sleep. Some people can feel that this is helpful for them as a starting point, but some people need to go further than that. And so they may need to see their medical practitioner and discuss that, or they may be interested in doing something like a specific cognitive behavioural program to assist in your sleep. And so they're run here at UC, they're run programs. Programs are also run over on the south side of the Canberra Sleep Laboratory, I believe, as well by the psychologist there. So this is one program that you may be interested in attending, which sort of will follow many of these sorts of things, but go a lot more into it. There are a couple of websites there which might be of interest. One is the Australasian Sleep Association, which has an insomnia group which can offer advice as well. For those who may have mental health issues or may think that's an issue, then seeking psychological help or going to the Beyond Blue website would be helpful. There's quite a good book by a fellow by the name of Colin Espy, Scott, who's written a book on overcoming insomnia and sleep problems. And it really is a program similar to what's run here, but it's a self-help one where you can go through it yourself. So there's some of the programs that I recommend to you, and you're welcome to take all these sort of resources and with you, and perhaps consider those things. If you're going to see someone, a sleep professional, or you're going to see a doctor, perhaps it might be good to sort of do this sort of sleep diary to see where you're actually at in terms of your sleep. On the back is these blank ones. You'll need to photocopy those, so you can make about 2 weeks of sort of recordings. Obviously, you need to know the time to do this. So you're doing this sort of recording while you've got the clock in the bedroom, and you can make the measurements about time. You can't do this while you're trying to actually treat yourself as such. There are a spectrum of sleep disorders, as I've suggested to you, and in some people there could be an intrinsic problem with their sleep that's affecting them, such as sleep apnea. And when we screen people coming to insomnia clinics, the rates have been as high as 40% in some studies of people who've got a sleep breathing abnormality. So these are people who may snore, they may gasp for breath at night time, or their partner may actually see them stopping breathing at night time. And because we're primarily a sleep apnea clinic here, we see lots of people who come in with this sort of presentation. They come in saying, I can't get off to sleep, I lie there for 2 hours. But I don't think I've got a problem with sleep apnea, and we do a sleep study on them. Lo and behold, there is a breathing problem there. And to their amazement, one of the treatments for sleep apnea is to wear a mask at night time. It's called CPAP therapy. When they see the mask, they said, you've got to be kidding. I spent 2 hours trying to get off to sleep. Now, and you want me to wear a mask? How am I going to sleep with that? And much to their amazement, they find that they can fall off to sleep within 10 minutes when the sleep apnea, the underlying problem is treated. Other sorts of conditions can be leading to daytime symptoms of sleepiness, and the various conditions there. Another condition that can be affecting sleep is periodic leg movements. Jerking of the legs at night time can be one of the things we need to look for in someone who's complaining of the inability to consolidate their sleep and daytime sleepiness. So our clinic here at the university, the sleep clinic, we have a clinic where we look for these various sleep disorders. We're mainly a sleep apnea clinic in terms of the clinic run by the physios and the sleep physicians, where patients take home a monitoring kit, sleep in their own home. They're wired up to mainly measure their breathing and the movements of their legs, and so we diagnose if there's any sleep breathing abnormality present, and then appropriately treat that depending on the severity